camera deep under this oil rig,
Mm-hmm.
and they spotted this thing with these insane long appendages.
Robert Kensington hit the water at 2 p.m., a man with a perfect safety record and nerves of steel. 45 minutes later, he was a broken man scrambling onto the deck of the Poseidon rig, demanding to leave forever. Why? Because the ocean went silent. The fish vanished, and in that unnatural void, a light appeared from the deep. What Robert saw down there defies biology. It was an intelligence that didn't just see him, it recognized him. And the craziest part? It had been waiting for him to be alone. The zone of silence. The ocean is a deceptive beast. From the surface, specifically from the steel grating of a massive offshore oil platform like the Poseidon Industries rig, it looks beautiful. It is a vast rhythmic expanse of golden crimson, reflecting the low afternoon sun. But experienced divers know better. They know that beauty is just a thin skin covering a world that is hostile to human life. Robert Kensington knew this better than anyone. He was known as the ghost among the crew for a reason. He was quiet, methodical, and moved through crisis situations with a calm that was almost unnerving. He had pulled 3 men out of fatal entanglements in the last year alone, never raising his voice, never panicking. But on this humid Tuesday afternoon, the ghost was shaking. Robert stood in Captain Reeves' office, water pooling on the industrial gray carpet from his wetsuit, his chest heaving as if he had just run a marathon. He didn't just look scared, he looked undone. He slammed a piece of paper onto the metal desk with a wet slap. It was his resignation, effective immediately. Captain Reeves, a man with 20 years of salt and grit in his wrinkles, looked up from his coffee. He had seen guys crack before. The isolation of the rig, the pressure of the deep, the long shifts, it gets to people. Usually they break after a close call with a malfunction or a brush with a tiger shark. But Robert was the guy you sent in when everyone else was scared. Reeves pushed a chair toward him, trying to de-escalate the situation. He assumed it was nitrogen narcosis, the martini effect. It happens to the best of them. You go down too deep or stay too long, and the nitrogen builds up in your blood, making you feel drunk, euphoric, or paranoid. You start seeing things that aren't there. But Robert wasn't drunk, and he wasn't confused. He was terrified, with a clarity that cut through the room like a knife. He insisted he was sober. He insisted his mix was perfect. He had checked his gauges 5 times. He was exactly at 180 feet. The pressure was manageable. His mind was sharp. And that, he confessed, was the problem. He wished he had been hallucinating, because if he wasn't, then the thing down there was real. To understand why a man like Robert would walk away from a lucrative career in seconds, we have to look at the dive itself. It was supposed to be a routine inspection of the pipeline junction at Sector 7. Normally, this is a 2-man job. Safety regulations demand a buddy system. But Johnson, his usual partner, had called in sick with severe food poisoning. The corporate office was breathing down Reeves's neck about pressure fluctuations in the line, terrified of a leak that could cost millions in fines. So Robert, confident and professional, entered the water as the working diver, while a fully dressed standby diver remained topside. Surface support monitoring his umbilical and comms. He actually preferred it. No chatter in the comms, no worrying about a rookie partner, just him and the work. He descended at 2 p.m. The conditions were arguably perfect. Visibility was 60 feet, which is rare for that sector. Sunlight filtered down in long cathedral-like rays illuminating schools of amberjack and curious groupers. It was the kind of dive that reminds you why you do the job. He reached the junction at 14:27. He was efficient, checking the valves, looking for corrosion, taking notes on his waterproof slate. He calculated a 45-minute bottom time with decompression scheduled in the chamber after recovery. Easy money. But here is the catch. The ocean is never truly quiet. There is always the click of shrimp, the distant hum of the rig's generators through the water, the movement of water over rock. But 20 minutes into the inspection, the sound stopped. It wasn't a gradual fade, it was immediate. 1 second, the water was teeming with life, schools of fish darting around the structure. The next second, they were gone. All of them, even the tiny damselfish that never leave their coral crevices, vanished. The amberjacks fled. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, it was heavy. It pressed against his eardrums harder than the water itself. Robert had been diving for 8 years. He knew that when the reef goes quiet, it means a predator is approaching, usually a shark, maybe a pod of orcas. His instinct screamed at him to ascend, to get back to the safety of the cage, where the surface. But his logical brain took over. He told himself it was just a current shift. He told himself not to be superstitious, so he forced himself to finish the checklist. He turned his back to the open ocean and focused on the bolts of the flange. And that is when he felt it. It started as a prickle on the back of his neck, that biological alarm system that humans have inherited from our ancestors who were hunted on the savannah. He felt exposed. He felt watched, not just observed, but studied. He spun around in the water, sweeping his heavy dive light across the gloom. The beam cut through the blue-black water, illuminating suspended particles and distant rocks, but nothing else. There was no shark, there was no whale, just the empty, silent void. But the feeling didn't leave. It intensified. It felt like 1,000 eyes were fixed on his back. His heart rate monitor on his wrist began to beep, a soft, frantic rhythm in the silence. He was hyperventilating, burning through his air faster than he should. And that is where things went from unsettling to impossible. Geometry of fear. Most people don't realize how vulnerable you are at 180 feet. You are not at the top of the food chain anymore. You are an intruder in a hostile world. Robert decided to abort. He wasn't going to die for a paycheck. He reached for his radio button to signal the surface that he was coming up. He keyed the mic, expecting the familiar crackle of the surface support team. Instead, he got dead air, absolute silence. He checked the connection. The umbilical line was intact, the hardwire clean, the comms panel powered, but the signal was gone. It was as if a bubble of isolation had been drawn around him. Then the light appeared. It didn't come from the surface, it came from below, deep below, in the crushing darkness of the trench that ran beneath the pipeline. A soft, pulsing glow ignited. It wasn't the erratic flash of a bioluminescent jellyfish or the chemical glow of plankton. This was a steady, rhythmic pulse, a blue-green luminance that felt intentional. It looked like the ocean was breathing, and it was rising. Robert watched frozen as the light grew brighter and larger. It was ascending at a speed that shouldn't be possible without creating a massive pressure wave. He slammed his hand on his buoyancy compensator, inflating his vest to lift him away. But his training kicked in. If he shot upward uncontrolled, the nitrogen in his blood would bubble out like a shaken soda, causing catastrophic decompression sickness. It would eliminate him just as surely as any sea monster. So he was forced to ascend slowly, agonizingly, while the thing beneath him raced to catch up. He looked down, and for the first time he saw the source of the light. It wasn't a fish. It wasn't a submarine. It was about 20 feet across, a massive, shifting shape that defied description. Robert told the captain it was geometric. It seemed to be made of angles and planes that shifted and rotated like a kaleidoscope, yet it was organic. It had protrusions that might have been limbs or tentacles, but they didn't paddle or stroke the water. They simply shifted position, occupying new space without traversing the space in between. It was like watching a glitch in reality. The creature stopped about 30 feet below him. It just hung there, suspended in the water column, defying gravity and current. And then Robert saw the face. It didn't have eyes in the traditional sense, not like a vertebrate. It had a surface, a smooth, reflective area that seemed to absorb the light around it. And within that surface, Robert saw intelligence. He didn't just feel watched anymore, he felt known. The most terrifying aspect of this encounter wasn't the size of the beast or the fact that it was unknown to science. It was the telepathy. Robert didn't hear a voice in his head, but he received a download of information. It was a projection of images, sudden and violent, flashing behind his eyes. He saw the pipeline he was working on. He saw the support boat. He saw the faces of his crewmates, Captain Reeves, Garcia, Johnson, Peters.
But he saw them from a specific angle, from below, looking up through the water. This thing hadn't just stumbled upon him. It had been watching the rig for weeks. It had been stalking them. Robert realized with horror that the dreams he had been having, the nightmares of drowning, the shadows in the corner of his eyes during night shifts, weren't stress. They were symptoms of this creature's proximity. It was a siren song, but visual. The creature's eyes, those shifting pools of light, were hypnotic. During his first stage decompression stop, he had to hold on to the anchor line with both hands because a part of his brain, a lizard brain instinct, wanted to let go. It wanted to swim down. It wanted to touch the light. The creature was inviting him. He hung there through the long minutes of mandatory stops, which felt like 3 lifetimes. The creature mirrored him. It waited. It shimmered with an oil-slick iridescence. It showed him more images. He saw himself. He saw his own face distorted by the water looking down. The creature was showing him that he had been marked. "These are my waters," the message seemed to say, "and you belong to me now." When Robert finally cleared his final stop and was recovered topside, gasping for the humid, oily air of the real world, he scrambled up the ladder like a man possessed. He didn't look back until he was on the grating. When he peered over the edge into the deep blue water, he could still see it, a faint, fading glow slowly sinking back into the dark. It hadn't chased him away. It had let him go, and that was almost worse. Empty bunks. Back in the office, Captain Reeves was pacing.
The skepticism was melting away, replaced by a cold knot of dread in his stomach. He wanted to write Robert off as crazy, but the details were too specific. The description of the silence, the geometric movement, the telepathic flashes, and there was one detail that Robert mentioned that turned the captain's blood to ice. Robert had mentioned Johnson. Johnson was the diver who had called in sick that morning, forcing Robert to dive alone. Robert had asked, "Why did Johnson really call in sick? Did you see him?" Reeves paused. He realized he hadn't. He had received a message through Garcia, the comms officer. Johnson had said he was vomiting, that he would be in his bunk all day, but no one had physically laid eyes on him since the night before. "Call him," Robert urged, his voice trembling again. "Ask him if he's been having dreams. Ask him if he felt watched." Reeves grabbed the phone and dialed Johnson's quarters. It rang and rang and rang. No answer. He tried the cell phone, straight to voicemail. The silence in the office was suddenly as loud as the silence in the trench. Reeves grabbed his radio. "Garcia, this is Reeves. I need a visual on Johnson. Go to his quarters. Knock down the door if you have to." The minutes that followed were excruciating. Robert stood by the window, staring at the darkening sea, refusing to look at the reflection in the glass. Finally, the radio crackled. Captain Garcia's voice was small, frightened. "The room is empty. The bed hasn't been slept in. and his gear is gone. Reeves dropped the radio. Johnson's gear was gone. A man with food poisoning doesn't take his dive gear.
A man with food poisoning doesn't disappear off a rig in the middle of the ocean without a boat. Yesterday, Robert whispered, "I saw him heading to the equipment bay around 2100 hours. He looked vacant, like he was sleepwalking. I asked him if he was okay, and he just stared right through me." The implication hung in the air like toxic smoke. The creature hadn't just marked Robert, it had marked Johnson too, and Johnson wasn't as strong. Or maybe Johnson was just the first. "What about Peters?" Robert asked suddenly. Reeves felt his heart stop. Peters was another diver who had gone missing 3 days ago. The official report said he had taken emergency leave for a family crisis on the mainland. A supply boat had picked him up, or at least that was the paperwork. But Reeves tried to remember if he had actually seen Peters get on that boat. He remembered signing the paper, but he didn't remember the goodbye. "Check on Peters," Reeves barked into the radio. "Verify his transport. Call the mainland." 10 minutes later, the answer came back. There was no record of Peters arriving on the mainland. The supply boat captain said Peters never boarded. His room on the rig was checked. Empty. Gear missing. They weren't quitting. They weren't sick. They were going into the water. The harvest. The reality of the situation crashed down on them. This wasn't a biological encounter. It was a harvesting. The creature down there, the geometric light in the abyss, was luring them in one by one. It used the dreams, the paranoia, and the hypnotic flashes to break their minds until they walked willingly off the edge of the platform and into the dark.
Johnson had gone last night. Peters 3 days ago. Who knew how many others? Robert had survived because he resisted. When he was down there face to face with it, he felt the pull. He admitted to the captain that he wanted to touch it. He wanted to merge with that impossible light. But his fear, his survival instinct, was just slightly stronger than the hypnosis. He had fled. But Johnson had likely walked into the water in a trance, sinking down into the black to meet the thing that was waiting for him. "You have to evacuate," Robert said, his voice flat. "It's not done. It showed me the whole crew. It showed me you, Captain." Reeves looked at the resignation letter on his desk. He looked at the vast black ocean outside the window. The lights of the rig were illuminating the water now, creating a pool of artificial brightness. But beyond that ring of light, the darkness was absolute. And somewhere in that darkness, 2 of his men were gone, likely taken by something that defied physics. "Get to the chopper," Reeves said quietly. "Supply run leaves at first light. You're on it." Robert didn't argue. He grabbed his bag. He didn't say goodbye to the crew. He didn't pack his clothes. He just took his wallet and his passport. He wanted to be as far away from the ocean as possible. He wanted to go to the desert, to the mountains, somewhere where the water couldn't reach him. As he walked out onto the deck to head to the helipad, the wind was whipping the waves into a frenzy. Robert made the mistake of looking down one last time. Through the metal grating of the walkway far below in the churning black water, he saw it, a faint, rhythmic pulse.
Blue. Green. It was surfacing. It wasn't staying in the trench. It was coming up to the rig. He ran. A final warning. Robert Kensington never dove again. He moved to a small town in Nevada, 1,000 miles from the nearest coastline. He works in construction now, on dry land under the scorching sun. He doesn't take baths. He takes showers. He doesn't look at lakes. But he still dreams. In his dreams, the room fills with water, the pressure builds, and the light appears in the corner of his bedroom. unfolding its geometric limbs, showing him images of the ocean floor. It shows him Johnson and Peters. They are still down there. They aren't dead. They are changed. They are part of the geometry now. They float in the abyss, watching, waiting. The Poseidon rig reported 3 more accidental drownings in the months after Robert left. The company covered it up, citing safety violations and equipment failure. They closed Sector 7 for maintenance, but Robert knows the truth. The pipeline was fine. The equipment was perfect. The ocean wasn't broken. It was occupied. The terrifying truth that Robert lives with isn't just that monsters exist. It's that they are intelligent, they are patient, and they are capable of reaching into our minds before they ever touch our bodies. We treat the ocean as a resource, a place to drill and fish and dump our trash. We forget that it is a world larger than our own, with history deeper than ours. What Robert saw suggests that we are not the landlords of this planet. We are just the tenants living on the dry islands, and the landlords are starting to evict us one by one. The question isn't why the creature let Robert go. The question is, did it? He sees the light in his sleep.
He feels the pressure in his chest when it rains. He hears the silence when the wind stops. Maybe he didn't escape. Maybe he is just a messenger, marked to carry the warning to the rest of us. So the next time you look out at the ocean and you see that beautiful, calm surface reflecting the sun, remember what lies beneath. Remember the silence. Remember the geometry. And if you ever feel that prickle on the back of your neck, that feeling that something is watching you from the deep, don't look, just run, because once it marks you, it never stops calling. If these creatures have been down there for millions of years, watching us, learning us, and they are only revealing themselves now, what has changed? Why are they rising? Are we looking at a random encounter? Or are we looking at the beginning of an invasion from below? If you heard the siren song from the deep, do you think you would be strong enough to swim away? Tell us in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, hit the like button and subscribe for more deep sea mysteries. Thanks for watching.